Hello there folks, welcome back to the Chap's Guide. My name is Ash and I am your host on this journey through men's style, self-development and personal grooming. Welcome back to the hearth, a lovely warm place to be on what is a cool autumn day here in southern England. And today it's probably the perfect place to talk about the subject of flexing. Specifically, the items and the things that men used to use to flex. Now, when I say flex, what I mean is show off. People would surround themselves typically with things which would demonstrate their success to other people. And these things used to be shiny. They used to be big ticket items that you could show the world, you could flaunt to other people. And it would say to others, this guy's either going somewhere or he's got somewhere. It used to say something about your refinement as a human being. This guy's got a bit of taste. He's invested a large portion of his available salary on an item. And that used to say something about you. But I've noticed, and you probably have too, over the last decade, the way that men flex has totally shifted. The traditional symbols of success are waning. Right? They're not the things that people with money or success now use to showcase that they have arrived, that they have some refinement, that they've been on a qualitative journey and they've learned some things, and that's the old traditional things and not what they buy anymore. They now surround themselves with different things to flex their success and their knowledge of the world. So today I'm going to take you on a little journey through my own observation of life over the last decade or so of, firstly, 3 things that used to be the big flexes within the men's world, and then finally 3 things which are the modern flexes. Because the truth is, we live in a totally different world to even a decade ago, where the digital revolution really has altered the way that we see success. And it has affected the way that men flex their success. So, what are the 3 things that we used to do to show we were successful in our world? Well, the classics were things like your wardrobe, your suit, the labels, basically. Because you will know that, if you were coming up in the era that I was, and I was born in 1970s, right? So I was around in that era of conspicuous wealth of the late 1980s, early 1990s. I was coming into my adulthood then. And back then, men used to put their money into certainly clothing, suits and the like, which were just a little bit too expensive for anybody to get their head around. People would buy bespoke suiting, they would buy clothing, which was absolutely a demonstration of their success. I mean, you think women, for instance, even in the modern era, a woman who wears, you notice women's shoes, that red bottom to the shoe, Christian Louboutin, as soon as you see that, you think that's a certain type of person. Now, for men, it was less obvious, but the suits, the ties, the other items that they had, they used to spend a lot of their money on visual presentations of their money. It would be the labels, and you know the ones I'm talking about. It was the Ralph Lauren's of that era, that it was up and coming, it was very desirable and crushingly expensive. But the problem with that type of flexing is that it's very, very shallow, isn't it? It's very shallow, it's surface level only, it doesn't tell you anything about the individual, other than they actually rather like being part of a herd. They like being seen to be successful by dressing in a certain way, and they're typically following somebody else's style in order to give you that visual presentation of success. So whilst I understand why men did it back then, and we all watched Miami Vice and tried to replicate those fancy outfits worn by Sonny Crockett and the other stars of the era by buying expensive things, the truth was it was awfully shallow. It was actually, now we know in hindsight, relatively low quality, and it really had no authenticity about the person who wore those items. Now, the next way that men used to flex, and I was never in a position financially to do this, but it was the cars and the other big ticket items that people used to put their money into. And, cast your mind back to that. I talked about Miami Vice, the Ferraris, the expensive sports cars. Maybe at a more affordable level, it was the souped up BMWs and the Mercedes and the Audis and the cars that the young, upwardly mobile folks, the nouveau riche, used to put their money into. And yes, of course, there's nothing more obvious than your garishly coloured BMW with all the skirts and the flaring around the wheel arches parked in the car park. And it would be something which set you apart as you tore down the high street in your loud, fancy car, which clearly cost a year's salary for pretty much everybody else, maybe more. But was it really a good flex if you think about it? It was riven with things like expense. These things were really expensive. It wasn't just a one-off. You had to maintain the things. You had to look after them. Many of these expensive cars are quite fragile, and they are expensive to keep on the road and maintain. And people found that to their cost. Many of those cars today can be picked up for a song on the second-hand market because nobody wants the hassle of maintaining and running cars which are just so expensive. And the other downside, as my recollection was of cars like that, was that they were often the source of great resentment from the people around you. I mean, woe betide the guy who parked his fancy BMW in a car park in a public place, because often he would come back to find a big scratch down the side of the car where somebody had run their car key down the side, probably muttering something under their breath about yuppies and things like that. So, those big ticket items, yeah, they were probably the most obvious sign that you were doing well in life. But they were the things which caused resentment, and they were damn expensive to run as well. Now let's talk about my final obvious flex from that period of time. And I'm going to be on board with you here because I've got one on my wrist. I'm talking about the watches, the bling, and the jewellery which men used to wear in that era. And I can cast my mind back, to iconic movies of that period. Wall Street, for instance. Michael Douglas, Gordon Gekko, wearing the solid gold, I think it was the Cartier Panther on his wrist. Remington Steele also wearing the Cartier Panther, the handsome, extremely debonair, exclusively dressed man or men who were held up as symbols of conspicuous wealth. And owning an expensive wristwatch in that era, or a piece of jewellery, whatever it might be, used to say to the world, I don't care about conspicuous wealth. I'm happy to spend my money on things which are really somewhat innocuous. I can buy a good wristwatch for £10, but I've decided to spend 3 months' wages in some cases on a wristwatch. Now, there was no bigger offender than the one that I've got on my wrist. It is the Rolex Datejust. My model is a stainless steel one, but of course back then everybody wanted the two-tone, the steel and gold model, which was maybe the most iconic of all of the watches of the yuppies, the upwardly mobile, the nouveau riche people from that era. If you didn't have a Rolex on your wrist, you just hadn't arrived. And to a degree, there's still an element of that in the world. But the fact was, again, much like everything else we've talked about, it's so shallow, isn't it? I mean, yes, I wear a wristwatch today and I wear a Datejust today because for me it's a sign of refinement and appreciation of heritage and quality, and I love the watch because it was something which I remember growing up being predominant in society. Nobody really cares about Datejusts now, so I'm not in that league, but these flexes, if taken into the modern era like wristwatches and jewellery, they're terribly shallow and they're quite performative in some degree because people will buy them and wear them because they are seen by others as a visual symbol of success. It is not because you yourself have an appreciation of horology or heritage. And that's one of the issues. If you ever met a guy wearing a nice watch and asked him what sort of movement is in that, and they've got no idea at all, they are merely wearing it because it looks good and they think that it shows you that they are successful. And there can be nothing in my mind more pathetic than a man who's bought something, quality engineering piece of equipment like a wristwatch, and knows nothing about it. And he's just wearing it so that you can see it. And that is the real epitome of the pathetic flex in my mind. So why has there been a change really in the way that men flex these days? How's it changing? I'm going to give you my 3 big flexes that I think are more evident in the modern era. But why is it changing? And I think it's changing because people no longer see that conspicuous wealth, spending money wantonly on things which are of little actual value, in reality, has changed because we're now in an experience economy, not an item economy. People, particularly the younger generations, because of the digital world, they're more inclined to show off, if you will, peacock, flex, by doing things like showing that they've travelled, they have more education, they are more about the experience of life than the actual owning of things which are shiny. And the other sort of side to this trend is that the world has changed somewhat. There is more of an emphasis now on living the life. So in the 80s and 90s, I don't remember any men flexing by saying, I've changed as many nappies as my wife has in the upbringing of my children. I'm actively engaged in my children's lives. Back then, that was actually pushed to the back of life. It was more about the man going out to work, going out to enjoy himself, living the big life. And the other side of the family were at home doing something totally different. But today, caregiving, looking after your kids, playing an active part in society, right, being a contributor to life, not just a taker and a consumer, that, I think, has changed the way that we think about flexing. Now, as I said, what are the 3 flexes which I think a man can demonstrate to the world to evidence his authenticity and his worth rather than cars, suits and wristwatches? Well, this is what I think. Now, the first area in which I think modern flexing has changed, and that is this. It is flexing competence. And I don't mean in the workplace or things like that. I mean generally throughout life. And you saw me doing it at the beginning of this video. I showed you how to light a fire without using a match or a flame. I used a ferrocerium rod and I used it to do something which is a practical thing in this world. I lit a fire from wood which I found here in the woodland. And that is a flex of competence. It could be something like a flex of your skill. Maybe you're a great baker. Maybe you're good at making wooden furniture, or you have metalworking skills, or you have something else, piano, singing, dancing. I see many more men these days being open to flexing, showcasing a skill that they have. And I think the reason why that's become more attractive as a flex is it's durable, right? It's not transitory like maybe a wristwatch or a fancy car, which now all of those fancy cars, they're rotting in scrapyards. They have no value. The money that people put into them, it's gone. Whereas if you can flex to the world, look, I can do something practical, useful, durable, valuable in the life that I share with other people, my friends, my partners, my children. I think that is something which is fundamentally attractive to other people. Somebody who can read a map, who, if you got into a tight spot, you knew that they would be a valuable human being to have at your side. Now that is a true flex, I think. Now the next flex, which I think is very much in the forefront in the modern world, and it's been placed there by things like Instagram and Facebook and YouTube and all these other digital platforms which allow you to share your life with the world. And the flex I'm talking about is the flex of time and travel. Because when people love showing you pictures of their holiday, when maybe, and even more so than holidays, traveling with purpose, when you've gone on an expedition, when you've done something, been somewhere which nobody else has done and been. Maybe you've trekked the Camino Trail, maybe you've trekked up to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro or Everest Base Camp, or you've done something like that. Now that's a flex. I mean, if I met somebody, for me, my area that I've always wanted to travel to in the world is Antarctica. I've never been to the southern continent. I've traveled widely as an individual, but there's an allure for me in the southern continent. I'll probably never go there because I think it's fundamentally damaging to the environment to go to a pristine place and burn fossil fuels to get there. But for me, if I encountered somebody who'd been there, I would find them utterly fascinating, beguiling. I'd want to learn all about it, hear about their journey. And for me, that would be a flex, to meet somebody who'd been to somewhere that I'd always wanted to go and could tell me stories about it and anecdotes about their experiences and their journey. And this is very much, as I said earlier, it's the experience economy which is valuable in the world today. Nobody gives a monkeys about a possession that you own, right? It's a fleeting thing. Okay, I like your watch, I like your car, but that's it. The conversation is over. But if you've been somewhere and you've experienced something and you've travelled with purpose, you've gone there for a reason. I mean, there are many, travel companies which will take you places where you can actually, help build a school or participate in a social activity in a faraway country, in a developing world, where your travel is contributing to the betterment of mankind. Wow, that's a flex in my mind. That is authenticity. That is somebody who's got a story to tell, not some trifling personal possession which is here today, gone tomorrow. So flexing for me today is travel, using your time for something better. Now, my third and final flex today is the flex of character, the flex of responsibility, and using your time on this world to good purpose. Because I think today, again, it's not about showing the world on various online platforms. It's about the way you live your life. Right? If you're a caregiver, if you're looking after people, if you're actively engaged in the bringing up of your kids, if you're actively engaged in your community, maybe you sit on the parish council, or you've taken a part in the improvement of life for your wider community. Maybe you're a volunteer in a charitable endeavour and you're using your free time for such an amazingly good purpose to help others. Or maybe you're doing something else, some other form of mentorship in your community. Maybe you're coaching some kids' sports teams, or you're giving back in some way. Or even beyond that, right? It's something like physical fitness. If you have committed to run a marathon, and you are showing the consistency of character, of the training, of the eating program, of getting that job done in the achievement of a long-term goal, and you get it in the end, what a flex that is. I remember my wife doing this several years ago. She decided, having never been a long-distance runner, to enter the London Marathon, which I thought to myself at the time, that's a bit of a stretch, that's a long, long way. It's a heck of a thing to put yourself up for. She did. She did the training. She never complained. Big job in the day. She works 10 hours every day. She carved out the time and she achieved her goal of running the London Marathon at a very respectable time of her age group. And me and my young son went to watch her. And I have never been more proud of my wife than the day that she achieved that goal of getting to the end of that journey that she'd set out on, to run the London Marathon in a very, very respectable time, because it showed me the mettle of her character. And that, I think, is an enormous flex. If you do something like that, constructive, visual, competitive, whatever it is, you're flexing your responsibility, you're flexing your character. And my God, that is an attractive flex rather than something trifling like a shiny possession. So there we go, gentlemen. Let me know if I'm wrong. Are you still drawn in and beguiled by the silly, shiny things which used to take us in and impress us in the 80s and the 90s and even into the early 2000s? Or are you now somebody who judges the flex that somebody puts out rather about their character, about the sort of person they are, about the way they lead their life, about not caring about the fancy labels and things like that? It's more about what is within and the experiences that you've had up to that point in your life and the skills that you have. That's what makes you a valuable person. Let me know if I'm wrong on this. Let me know in the comment section below, or ask me a question. Drop me an email. I'd be delighted to hear from you, and I will endeavour to make a video to answer your question if you ask it. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and subscribe for more just like this. And if you want to see more of my journey to Chap Nirvana, you can become a patron. In the description box below this video, there is a link to my Patreon page where I make extra content for my patrons, and you don't even have to pay for many of the tiers on my Patreon page. So go down there and join me on the journey. Until the next time we meet, remember, it's all about the skills and the man that you are, not the shiny things you possess. Until we see each other again, take care.